Gary Haggerty was a UVF leader and a paid state informant when he murdered 4 people in a 6-month killing spree.
He was a walking crime machine.
Finally arrested, Haggerty became a supergrass. He got just a 6-year sentence after agreeing to give evidence against former UVF comrades and his special branch handlers. Was the deal that he made with the state worthwhile?
For the state, it certainly was. Not for the families.
Tonight, Spotlight reveals that one special branch officer handled 3 informants, all in the same UVF gang, and all implicated in murder.
To me, the police deserve to be punished as much as anybody else.
10 years after the police ombudsman said she found evidence of collusion between the police and UVF, the subsequent investigation that resulted in Haggerty's arrest has not led to any police officer being charged.
I often say that the story can never be told about what Special Branch achieved and the number of lives that they did save, including police officers and civilians.
Following the Haggerty judgment, Spotlight asks if the truth will ever be told about how informants involved in murder were used and the state's role in running them.
Was the system faulty and wrong, or was there mismanagement by individuals? Mistakes were made, and we may not have been able to prevent somebody being killed as a result sometimes.
In 1991, Gary Haggerty joined the notorious UVF gang based on the Mount Vernon housing estate in North Belfast. Very quickly, he was embedded in the gang's criminal enterprises: drugs, beatings, intimidation, and murder. Alan Mains was a detective superintendent in CID, but his career began on the beat in North Belfast.
I can recall being a young sergeant up in that area that you've spoken about. So I would have had a different take as a police officer then in terms of knowing about them and how effective and ruthless they would have been. Psychopathic, ruthless killers.
Special Branch were keen to penetrate this organised crime gang, and Gary Haggerty was soon recruited as an informer. The gang's leader was Mark Haddock. He would go on to murder at least 10 people. And Haddock would be the other gunman in Haggerty's first murder in 1994.
Two gunmen went to the back door of the house in Skegnale Avenue around 9:30 last night. They were let into the house by one of 4 children being cared for by their grandfather while their parents were out. Today, a neighbour said the children ran crying from the house after the gunman shot their grandfather.
This is Sinead Monaghan, whose father, Sean McParland, was killed that night.
I felt guilty because I had asked my daddy to babysit. If I hadn't have asked him to babysit, he would have been all right.
The UVF had planned to kill her husband Michael in a sectarian attack. They mistakenly shot dead Sinead's father instead.
It was on a Thursday night, the 17th of February, 94. There was 2 gunmen went into the house.
Because he was an informer, Gary Haggerty says he insisted on being the lead gunman to deflect his UVF colleagues' suspicions away from him.
Haggerty shot my daddy. They came in and put the gun to his head first, and the other children were there and watched all this. And then that's when they shot my father.
In January, Sinead and Michael finally saw State Agent Haggerty sentenced in court for the murder of Sean McParland and for 500 other crimes. But they believe it is the Special Branch handlers who should have been in the dock because they must have known enough to stop the killings.
To me, the police deserve to be punished as much as anybody else because they were letting it happen. Because they let them go ahead and do it.
Raymond McCord's body was found early yesterday by a lorry driver as he opened up a quarry off the Ballyduff Road in Newton Abbey. He'd suffered severe head injuries.
Raymond McCord Sr.'s son was killed by the same Mount Vernon UVF gang in 1997. He confronted the paramilitaries over what happened, and as a result has faced a series of threats to his life.
I live in a house of my own, and it's a life I've chosen. Couldn't have a girl living here simply because the danger would put her in. The public image, people maybe have of myself as some sort of tough sort of guy, but when you're sitting there in your house on your own, it's completely different.
For the past 21 years, Raymond McCord has been fighting for justice for his son, Raymond Jr.
That's my son there. And I know the guys that murdered him.
My son was from the Eunice community. He served in the RAF.
His son had also joined the UVF, and when a drug deal went wrong, his punishment was a brutal death.
He was beaten to death. They killed him using concrete blocks.
Raymond McCord always said that an informant was involved in the murder of his son, and that was the conclusion of the police ombudsman. Operation Ballast was Nuala Olone's investigation and report into Raymond McCord Jr.'s death.
As a consequence of the practices of Special Branch, the position of the UVF, particularly in North Belfast and Newton Abbey, was consolidated and strengthened over the years.
The report states that Mark Haddock, a Special Branch informant, ordered the killing. Raymond McCord believes that police had known about the murder before it happened.
I started this journey to get the people that murdered Raymond. I want to see him go to jail. I want to see him go to jail for a long time.
The Ballast report also concluded that two informants, namely Haddock and Haggerty, were involved in Sean McParland's murder. Last month, Raymond, Michael and Sinead joined thousands who believe they're being denied justice on a march for truth.
Survivors, victims and relatives of those killed by loyalists and members of the security forces are holding a rally in Belfast.
The families of Haggerty's victims had been encouraged to learn that after his arrest in 2009, the Ombudsman's files had been sent to the Public Prosecution Service.
The expectation was that Gary Haggerty would then be taken forward as a cooperating witness to prosecute others, 11 loyalist paramilitaries, but also in respect of 2 Special Branch officers.
But they were still shocked when in October last year they learned the full extent of the 15 accusations against Special Branch handlers, including 8 for murder, 2 attempted murders and 4 of conspiracy to murder.
The process in relation to Gary Haggerty was 10 years.
As Sinead and Michael's solicitor, Niall Murphy says the families felt let down, having spent years cooperating with the case.
It was emotionally exhausting and distressing for families. There was the opportunity for truth recovery. He would tell the whole truth. So the families invested their hopes and ambitions in that process on the understanding that there would be the whole truth.
And Haggerty's case is just one of many where campaigners believe that the role of the intelligence services is being protected at any cost.
And the protection of the state agents who were guilty of the atrocity continues to this very day. And the only service that the police have offered us are lies, denial and delay.
Raymond McCord's search for truth began in 2002 when he walked into the police ombudsman Nuala Olone's office to complain about police failures in investigating his son's murder.
I can remember it very clearly because he came in and he told me his story, and I suppose, to be honest, I didn't believe it. It was such a serious allegation. I had heard quite a lot by 2002, but the scale of what he was describing was something I hadn't anticipated.
Her damning conclusion in the Ballast report led to criminal investigations into both the Mount Vernon UVF and Special Branch officers who were handling informants in the gang. As a result, 2 years later, Gary Haggerty was arrested. In order to get a lighter sentence, he signed up to become an assisting offender, in other words, a supergrass. A deal done under the Serious Organised Crime and Policing Act, SOCPA.
The Serious Organised Crime and Policing Act, SOCPA, was a process put in place to allow former paramilitaries to give details and give an account of not only their role but what else they knew about other activities. And that to do so, they would get an amnesty or indeed a deal through the courts.
During the next 7 years, he was fully debriefed by the police, and one of the things he alleged appeared to confirm something Nuala O'Lone could not. It was a complaint by Raymond McCord that the police had advance warning about the attack that resulted in his son's death.
3 complaints were upheld, the 4th one wasn't. Says that the police knew that something was going to happen to him, he was going to be killed. You couldn't get the evidence.
The Ombudsman concluded there was no evidence to support this allegation. But in fact, Haggerty says that he left a telephone message for Special Branch in which he didn't name Raymond McCord Jr. as the target, but said they needed to ring him back as a matter of life and death. But it was only in January, when Haggerty was being sentenced, that Raymond learned about this. The judge said that he, Haggerty, had alleged he'd given information which had the potential of preventing the murder of Raymond McCord. Nuala O'Lone could find no evidence of this allegation in the files she'd seen. Her report found evidence of poor record-keeping by Special Branch and went on to conclude that material was destroyed routinely. So what did you think when you heard that Gary Haggerty had said he was the person who did tell the police?
I always knew that there was missing material. Missing because it hadn't been written down at all, missing because it had been written down and destroyed. I still don't know whether Gary Haggerty is right, and he did tell the police.
For most of the families, Haggerty's willingness to speak about his former colleagues and his police handlers offered them a hope of finding out the truth. Their hopes were destroyed when the PPS decided Haggerty's evidence wasn't enough.
We don't believe we can rely on what he has told us to a sufficient degree to bring about a criminal conviction. When dealing with an assisting offender, I believe as a prosecutor that one should look for independent corroborating evidence.
The PPS said that as a supergrass or an assisting offender, Haggerty's allegations required corroboration, and there wasn't any. And Alan Mains, who as a CID detective superintendent ran informants over many years, says informants live by lying.
They're informers. They have 2 sides to their story. Their side and the side they want other people to believe.
So when the families went to court to see Haggerty get sentenced, they were already disappointed to know his testimony would not produce the outcome they'd hoped for.
I seen him when he walked in, and I seen his face when he walked out. He just kept his head down, just walked straight in. He was cold.
Cold murder, that's what it was, serial killer. Just a big lump of a man, that's all he was, fat.
Relatives for Justice lawyer Mary McCallan attended the sentencing hearing with the families. She says the court heard allegations of some extraordinary crimes.
One in particular that stuck out was about bus trips that had been organised to IKEA in Scotland, where weapons were then packed into flat pack furniture and brought back for distribution to Carrickfergus, Ballyclare, Mount Vernon and Tigers Bay, UVF. Some of the weapons were of a good quality and some were of a poorer quality, and Haggerty would decide who he would give the good and the poor quality weapons to.
There was another surprising admission by Haggerty that was revealed in court.
Some of it was really shocking, particularly whenever it transpired that the UVF had assistance to Bug Newtonabbey police station, and that they had a surveillance car that they had used to track and target people you know, over a course of years. That was genuinely shocking.
Haggerty appeared to sit without emotion as his life of violent crime unfolded in court. The enormity of over 500 charges didn't seem to bother him.
The majority of time, Haggerty sat quietly. He didn't say much or move throughout the course of the hearing. There was no sense of remorse or emotion. He seemed to know exactly what was going to be said. It was something that he needed to get through to get to the next stage of his plan, which was release.
The judge said Haggerty was not before the court to atone for his crimes after a road to Damascus conversion. His motivation was, he said, one of self-interest and pragmatism. But the judge said there was a well-established public interest in discounting sentences in the circumstances. There was much anger over Haggerty's sentence, just 6 years for over 500 crimes, including 5 murders.
Relatives of some of Gary Haggerty's victims looked stunned when his sentence was handed down.
How can a man convicted of that many crimes be set free into society? The man's a serial killer. He was a paid state informant.
Nuala O'Loan had been appointed to liaise with the families after Haggerty's arrest. She feels the entire judicial process repeatedly failed them. In your opinion, did it work properly?
No. Endless frustration, endless frustration. It was delayed. There weren't enough staff. Resources weren't available. The whole debriefing process took far longer than it should have done.
It wasn't just the families who questioned Haggerty's sentence. The day after the March for Truth, the PPS said it would appeal it as being unduly lenient.
The Public Prosecution Service is appealing the sentence given to the loyalist supergrass Gary Haggerty, saying it's too lenient.
Whether or not Haggerty gets a longer sentence, his own solicitor believes it's Special Branch that really escaped justice.
Well, in one sense he has got off lately. The Special Branch have got off an awful lot lighter than Gary Haggerty. There's no member of Special Branch can expect to do a day in prison in relation to the offences that they have committed over this period.
Haggerty's solicitor believes offences had been committed, but in fact no one was convicted and the officers were not charged. The judge recognised how unsatisfactory this was for the families when he said, "There is a particular concern in relation to the failure to charge 2 named police officers in respect of whom the defendant made allegations of serious criminality." While these allegations of serious criminality could not be corroborated, Spotlight has new information about the level of penetration of the Mount Vernon UVF gang and how it was managed by Special Branch handlers. Nuala O'Loan's report mentions a number of informers in the Mount Vernon UVF. We already know Mark Haddock was the man referred to as Informant 1 in the Ballast report. He carried out at least 10 murders. Gary Haggerty is referred to as another informant. Spotlight's been told by several sources that these 2 killers, Haddock and Haggerty, who together murdered Sean McParland, shared the same Special Branch handler. And sources have also told us that this same officer handled a 3rd member of the Mount Vernon UVF, someone who was involved in the murder of Raymond McCord Jr. Former Assistant Chief Constable Alan McQuillan believes having multiple sources in one criminal gang could be beneficial.
The ideal situation is where you have multiple sources reporting from within the one group of people, and you can then correlate all the information coming in the different channels. And you can then begin to cross-compare to try and find out what's the real truth here, because they'll all be telling you different stories.
Nuala O'Loan believes that with at least 3 informers, Special Branch should have been able to cross-reference information and establish a clearer picture of who was responsible for which criminal acts.
I have no doubt that it would have been possible if they had released the evidence, the information which they had, to CID. It would have been possible for CID officers who really wanted to stop the killing, to stop the killing.
And Alan McQuillan is convinced that the criminal career of Haggerty should have been brought to an end sooner than it was.
The answer in relation to the murders is he shouldn't have been able to get away with it. That's the simple truth.
As part of her investigation, Nuala O'Loan had access to some special branch files on the Mount Vernon UVF, and she believes that informants told their handlers of their role in murders.
Haggerty wasn't the only informant, there were several of them. They, on occasion, among them, they confessed to murders to their handlers and to all sorts of serious crime.
But without corroborating evidence, Alan Mains cautions against believing that intelligence is the same as evidence.
I still think it's an allegation that that these police officers knew that these guys had murdered. These allegations are made by people who, quite frankly, you know, is the information substantiated? Is it sort of, does it stand the test of scrutiny?
Alan McQuillan told us that running thousands of informers over the years of conflict was difficult to manage, subject to human error, and may indeed have cost lives.
Mistakes were made. Mistakes were made at times. You know, this is a human organisation over 20 years managing hundreds of agents, thousands of agents over 20, 25 years. And people did make mistakes at the time. They misidentified stuff, they misclassified it, they misunderstood it. And we may not have been able to prevent somebody being killed as a result sometimes.
Sometimes the intelligence was right, sometimes it was wrong. Sometimes we got it right, sometimes we got it wrong. But it was never deliberate.
But there was one other insight into the world of informing that was revealed at the Haggerty sentencing hearing. The judge disclosed that the then investigating authority, the Historical Inquiries Team, or HET, was assisted by another state player when Haggerty was being offered his assisting offender deal.
Haggerty was invited to provide assistance at a previous meeting he attended with members of the HET and the security service.
So the Historical Inquiry Team were present and security services. What does that mean?
Security services would be MI5, and we'd be very interested to find out why they felt the need to be present at that meeting.
Whatever the reasons, we've confirmed with senior government officials that MI5 did indeed attend the meeting. And we've also learned of one other link with the Haggerty case involving MI5. When the PSNI's major crime branch took over from the HET, the handover was discussed at a meeting of the policing board. Minutes show MI5 were present.
It's a document, the policing board of January 2010.
It's only 8 days after Gary Haggerty has signed up to become an assisting offender.
Well, at the meeting, you have the Public Prosecution Service Senior Assistant Director, Mr. Raymond Kitson. There is ACC Harris, who's head of C2 and C3, the intelligence section of the PSNI, the Security Service, which is MI5, and it wasn't anyone just in the Security Service, it's the Northern Ireland Director. So that's the head of MI5. And what would MI5 be doing at a police board meeting?
Former Assistant Chief Constable Alan McQuillan has a possible explanation.
The short answer is I simply don't know. Unless it was, I don't know if Haggerty had had any previous relationship with MI5. That would be one option.
But Alan Mains suggests that their presence could be purely logistical.
They're the gatekeepers of all intelligence, not just Republicans. I do believe they're the gatekeeper, and special branch report back into them, intelligence. So I can only assume that there's some management role of the intelligence side.
And one of MI5's principal roles in Northern Ireland was to fund the payment of informers.
They actually paid the money which was paid to the informants when they provided information, you know, large sums of money, thousands of pounds changed hands, and that came from MI5.
We asked MI5 if they could tell us what their interest was in Gary Haggerty. We received no response. On the Loyalist side, there was Haggerty, but on the Republican side, there was the informant known as Stakeknife. Both would have shared MI5 as a paymaster. Stakeknife rooted out IRA informers, many of whom were put to death. As in the Haggerty case, there are families linked to a Stakeknife investigation who want to see him and his handlers in court. an IRA recording of a so-called confession by IRA member John Dignam. John Dignam was then shot dead. His late parents wanted this man brought to justice, Freddie Scappaticci. For many years, Scappaticci was believed to have been Britain's most important informant, Steak Knife, responsible for the IRA's internal security. Spotlight previously revealed that Scappaticci is a suspect in up to 40 murders. And the day after Haggerty was sentenced, Scappaticci was arrested by police attached to Operation Canova. He was released without charge a few days later.
What we have in Operation Canova is, on the face of it, a well-resourced investigation of up to 50 detectives looking at the alleged role of an agent known as Steak Knife into a series of IRA killings of alleged informants within the ranks of the IRA. That probably represents the only show in town at this stage, a last chance saloon, in terms of the state role in killings and criminality.
Campaigners are convinced that intelligence services are absolutely determined to make sure that the security services are kept out of court. One possible clue to this comes from MI5 themselves. In a letter to Downing Street in 2012, they voiced their objections to any inquiry into the murder of Belfast solicitor Pat Finucane, a victim of loyalist collusion. They wrote, "Leaving aside the cost, the fact that agents are being required to give evidence and the pressure on us to make past agent reporting public will have a damaging effect on the service's current ability to recruit and retain agents. This impact will be felt across our range of counter-terrorism work, in particular in Northern Ireland."
It doesn't inspire confidence in the rule of law. It really points to a process whereby an intelligence agenda permeating all of these terrorist activities trumps everything else.
Earlier this month, Raymond McCord and Michael Monaghan each gave talks on collusion at Queen's University in Belfast.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for attending here.
Raymond McCord's solicitor, Paul Farrell, warned of the long battle for justice.
The victims aren't going away, but they are passing away.
Justice should be justice. And I want to see everyone who's involved in the murders to be questioned and get a fair trial as well, but be brought to justice.
Michael Monaghan, the intended victim of Gary Haggerty, is legally challenging the decision not to prosecute Haggerty's handlers.
We will fight it. I'm actually looking at meeting with the public prosecution to see what they're going to say with my own solicitors, and we're trying to overturn it.
For their lost relatives, the families say they will battle on for the truth, even if it means from beyond the grave.
I believe my kids will take it on, my children, if we have to go on for years upon years. So something has to be heard for the families and to try and get it across to them. They just can't make it go away.
Throughout the Troubles, the government insisted it was operating within the law. How the police were meant to recruit informants like Scappaticci and Haggerty without breaking the law has never been properly explained. The role of the state and how to get to the truth are significant questions that won't go away.